What's up, Vetters? Patrick here with Vetted. I have a very special interview that I did last week that I'd like to share today. His name is Anthony Peake. Anthony Peake is a British author and researcher known for his work on consciousness, near-death experiences, and the nature of reality. Born in 1954, he has written numerous books blending science, psychology, and metaphysics, including his acclaimed debut, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die. Peake's work often explores unconventional ideas, such as his cheating the Ferryman hypothesis, which suggests consciousness persists after death through an interplay of quantum mechanics and neurology. With a background in sociology and a lifelong curiosity about the mysteries of existence, he has become a prominent figure in consciousness studies, delivering thought-provoking insights through his writing and public speaking. Tony, what happens after we die? What do you think happens?
Well, I think the massive question is after and before.
Tony, what happens after we die? What do you think happens?
Well, I think the massive question is after and before we even start the issue, because my hypothesis, well, my speculation, I mean, it's not even really a hypothesis, but I do the science of this, that the thing that people are missing in life after death is time. And it's the one thing that people never really talk about when they talk about life after death, because I argue we never get to the point of dying because something really weird happens with our time perception in the final seconds of, or the final microseconds of our life. And indeed, many years ago, back in 2012, I think it was, I wrote a book called The Labyrinth of Time, which was about time perception and how we perceive time. For example, time is the only thing I know that is measured by itself. You can have a pound of apples and everything else as well, but you can only ever have a minute of a minute. But there's no way that I know that my minute is identical to yours. And we confuse time with clock time, the idea of a clock, and you look at a clock hand going round, but that's geometry. It's not time itself. And in many ways, I always quote a very famous quotation by St. Augustine, the philosopher priest many years ago, when he said that when he doesn't think about time, he thinks he understands it. But the minute he starts to think about it, he realizes it's the greatest mystery possible. And of course, years onwards, people like Einstein, when Einstein came up with his fun, incredible ideas way back in 1905, when he came to the conclusion that time and space are exactly the same thing. Now, if time and space are the same thing, that is then very freaky, because, what is going on here? And, you listen to people who've had near-death experiences, and one of the major traits of near-death experiences is something called time dilation, where people say that when you're in an altered state of consciousness, and it's not just in near-death experiences, it's in out-of-body experiences, it's in dreaming states, it's when people take ayahuasca, DMT, they all say the same thing, that time has a different quality.
Sure.
And time can take forever for an incident to happen. Like, there'll be people out there, I'll guarantee there'll be people watching this now, and they'll say, many years ago, I was given bad news, and then suddenly everything slowed down. Or I was involved in a car crash, and I felt I had all the time in the world to negotiate round the accident. And this is because this is literally what happens. The brain releases certain neurochemicals within the brain to slow down our perception of time. And I think that what happens is there's a massive release of these neurochemicals at the point of death, in which case your time as the dying person changes. So for you, the final second of your life could be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 years, a whole lifetime. And I think this is what happens. We never actually die. And that's why my concept is called cheating the ferryman. We cheat the ferryman. We don't. And again, this is hard science. This is not, this is one of the really interesting aspects of my work, that it is proven by science. It's proven by science research. But I'm the only writer that's putting it in context of human experience. And there's a guy called David Eagleman, for instance, who is an American psychologist, and he's been doing research into this. And he's discovered that time dilates when people are under stress. When you're frightened and when you're scared, time gets slower. And they did a series of fascinating experiments whereby they had somebody who was placed on a very high gantry, and they were rigged up so that they couldn't kill themselves, but they were pushed off it. And as they were falling, they were asked to look at a watch that they had, which had sort of digital numbers on it. And a number of the people actually vaguely recognized the numbers, which they couldn't possibly see. Now, I've argued with that, and I've said it's a very interesting case. But the important thing about the David Eagleman experiments is the person that's involved in the experiment knows they're not going to die. That's the massive difference. So when
Sure.
somebody actually does fear for their life, then this time dilation effect takes place. And then the other thing that then is really fascinating then is if you tie that in to two other things that people experience regularly. The other thing is something called a panoramic life review, where people have a near-death experience, don't they? And they say, my life flashed before my eyes. I saw
Yeah.
all my life in detail. I saw it either in a series of images, or I saw it in some detail, or I lived every second of my life. Now, if you then put that together with the time dilation element, you start to come to some quite interesting ideas. Because could it be that when you actually have a real death experience rather than a near death experience, that the life doesn't flash in front of your eyes? That it is literally a minute by minute where you have all the time in the world to live your life again. So in the final second of your life, for you could be another 70 years. Whereas for somebody watching you die, it's a split second.
Yeah.
Now, if this is the case, what other bit of evidence do I have? Deja vu. If we are living our lives again, and I believe that at least 70% of us are, because 70% of people around the world, it is known, will have at least one experience of deja vu. The experience of recognizing a set of circumstances that you know that somewhere in your deep, distant past, you've experienced it before. You know, that sudden woo, and you get the shiver down your spine, and you go, I know this place, or I've been here before, or I've spoken to this person. Now, again, this is really intriguing because many people argue that that is evidence of reincarnation, and it's evidence that you have lived a life before in that location. And I argue, no, it's not, for a very important point. If you suddenly have a deja vu sensation now, and you go, ooh, I remember doing this before, you're talking to me in a studio using Yeti Blue devices or whatever. So the memory you're having, and you're wearing modern clothes, if it was a past life memory, it wouldn't be the same set of circumstances. So my argument is that when you have a deja vu, or more accurately, deja veku, which is already lived, literally, you are remembering the incident you are experiencing now at some time in your past. And again, the standard definition of deja vu, according to Professor Vernon Neppe, who is a psychiatrist in Seattle, who wrote a definitive book on near-death experiences around about 20 years ago now. His definition of a deja vu is really quite interesting. It is that the recognition of a set of circumstances that you know happened in an indeterminate time in your past. Because that's the thing about deja vu, isn't it? You can't remember when you experienced it. So when people say, oh, deja vu is seeing something you've seen before, it's not. It's seeing something that you kind of recognize, but you don't know from where. And this is profoundly important. Now, I know that there'll be people out there who will have done their degrees in psychology and neurology and everything else, and they'll say, oh, it's been explained. Deja vu has been explained. And if you even look at now in textbooks on deja vu, they argue that the explanation was put forward in 1961 by a guy called Robert Efron. And it's called the visual pathways argument. And it's very, very clever. And it's the idea that, as you know, we have two sections to the brain, two hemispheres. And we know, and I write about this in a number of my books because I discuss the implications of this as well. There is
Yeah.
effectively two personalities in our head, one that exists in our dominant hemisphere and one in our non-dominant hemisphere. And usually our dominant hemisphere is our left hemisphere and our non-dominant is the right hemisphere. Now, what then happens is that in order for both hemispheres to have stereo vision, the periphery field of each eye feeds one side or the other. Okay, so if I'm making sense, so literally one side of your eye feeds that side, and the other side of that eye feeds the other side, and vice versa. So effectively, there are two kind of visual systems taking place here. And Ephron's argument was that what happens is that we see something and it's processed by our non-dominant hemisphere first, and then it crosses something called the corpus callosum, which is the thing that holds the two sides of the brain together, and it gets to our dominant hemisphere just as just as that is processing the image. So what happens? You get like a double echo. You see something and then you kind of see it again. And he argues that's what a deja vu is.
Mm.
The only problem is with this, I think it was around about 2013, 2014, a researcher at the University of Leeds here in the UK called Akira O'Connor. There's a research unit that researches deja vu experiences at the University of Leeds. And it's run by a guy called Chris Moulon, very interesting character. And he did research with people who had been born blind. And he found, quite interestingly, that people who are blind have deja sensations, but they hear something and hear it again in exactly the same way. And of course, I've argued that a deja vu sensation is not just sight, it's sound, it's touch, it's all these things. It's all our senses coming together as they do normally when we're processing external reality. And they discovered that the way in which the brain functions for hearing is completely different to how it functions for sight. So the visual pathways argument can work for deja vu, but it cannot be working for the deja sensations of hearing. So it means that it hasn't been explained at all. So we have to go back to explain it again. And I always argue it's exactly what it feels like. If you tell somebody you have a deja vu, you know that you've sensed it before. I mean, do you get deja vu sensations?
Oh, I've had them for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and again, it's one of the most puzzling and the most common psychic in raised commas events that people have. But my
Yeah,
hypothesis would explain it, because if we are living our life again in the final seconds of our life, there would be times when you will come across circumstances that you remember. And
sure.
it is literally a memory. Or, as my associate, Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who's an American quantum physicist who lives in Bern in Switzerland. Many years ago, I came across a fascinating paper that he had written on deja vu. He's one of the world's experts on deja vu. He's a Jungian analyst, but he actually is a quantum physicist by PhD. He's an expert in holograms, by the way. And he argued, and this is fascinating, he has what he calls the dream theory of deja vu. And he argues that what has happened is, in the last few days, the last few weeks, you've had a dream that is coming true now. You've dreamt this before. And like with dreams, we forget dreams. We don't really remember them until something triggers a memory. And what art argues is that we have precognitive dreams regularly. And that when we encounter in three-dimensional reality the dream scenario, we recognize it, but we don't remember when we recognized it. And I met with Art many years ago in Switzerland. I mean, we're now close friends. I met him a few times since he's actually been in this house and everything. And when I first met him, I said, Art, your hypothesis is really interesting and really good. But there's one problem with it. How can you have a dream about an event that is yet to happen? According to modern science, the future hasn't happened yet. So how can you have a dream containing the complete scenario of your dream experience? It doesn't make sense. And I said, but my cheating the Ferryman hypothesis can explain it, because your dream that you have is a memory of the last time you experienced it.
Yeah.
So therefore, it makes eminent sense. And this is why sometimes dreams are so confusing and so weird, because there was a guy called John William Dunn who in 1905, I think it was 1904, had a series of weird precognitive dreams when he was down in South Africa. He was covering the Boer War. He was at that time, I think he was a journalist of some description, but he was an aeronautical engineer. And he had this incredible dream. Do you want me to explain it? Because I can stop. You can ask more questions, or I can continue with my monologue. It's up to you.
Um. Yeah, let me just jump in for a sec because I do
Yeah.
have a few things, but I'm gonna forget them. You've said a
Okay.
lot of super interesting things, to be honest. I guess I would just to go back to the original question to kind of sum up what you think happens after we die. So you basically you think death doesn't exist. We sort
Correct.
of live forever, right? Death
Yeah.
is
What
not.
happens is that literally you live your life again, and at the
So
end of that, and the end of that life, you live your life again, again, and again, and again. But it's different every time. It's different every time in the same way that Connor's in
uh
the movie Groundhog Days every day is different. It's
sure. Okay.
because part of you already knows what happened last time. It amends your actions depending upon the
Interesting.
knowledge it has, like a third person computer game. It's the same kind of
Sure.
thing. You play the same
Sure.
scenario. And
Sure.
I argue that each time it changes differently. So it means in technical terms, it means that literally you can, over many, many lives, fulfill every possible scenario that could happen in your life. And you do it over thousands of lives. Danny Rubin, who is the guy that wrote Groundhog Day, told me in an interview that I did with him a few years ago that he envisaged that Connors in that would have 6,000 days. And I argue that this is what really happens. This is what we do, all in the final seconds of our lives.
Well, I actually interviewed Stephen Tobolowsky a couple times from Groundhog Day on my other podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which character was he then?
he's the guy with the bald head, and he comes
Oh
up
yeah,
and yeah,
Ned, somebody or other,
Ned,
isn't he?
Ned,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
Ned,
that was a
yeah,
doozy when he steps in the puddle. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. He's a great guy. He's from Texas. He's from Dallas, actually.
Oh
That's how I got him
right.
on.
Wow. How great.
Um, so no, that's very interesting. So God, there's so many questions I have. This is why I wanted to talk to you. This is amazing. My mind is just firing off right now. So, okay,
It's the peak experience, as
I
Abraham
love
Maslow
it.
would say.
Hey, you trademark that. That's cool. Um, so I am so basically, if death doesn't exist and you repeat your life over and over again, I guess let me ask two questions. One, is it so let's say you get down to the end of your life and your last second, and in that last second you live 70 years again, and then in that 70 years does that happen again, like a Russian
Yeah,
nesting doll
yeah.
sort of scenario, like an
Yeah,
infinite mirror sort of thing?
it's an application of Zero's bisection paradox. It's to do with the fact of bisecting time and whether you can bisect time into smaller and smaller bits of time. And there's no
Sure.
reason why you can't do that. There is an argument to say that time cannot be divided infinitely.
Yeah.
And there was a guy called David Finkelstein many years ago said that probably there's a quantum particle of time, which he jokingly called a chronon. But
Yeah.
technically, you can. And you remember there's the old Zeno's paradox, the idea of a frog jumping from the center of a pond, and each jump is half the size of the other one. You can show mathematically that the frog never gets to the end of the pond. Now, there's a
Sure.
more sophisticated version of this called Thomson's lamp, which anybody, if they can check up, it's to do with a lamp being switched on and off in smaller and smaller times. So effectively, as you understand it, within the bisection paradox, you never get to the point of death. It's
Sure.
always just that little. It's like the tortoise and the hare, the race,
Yeah.
and the tortoise gets a
Sure.
half start, but by the time the hare gets to where the tortoise was, it's moved on a bit further. And mathematically, this is quite a fascinating idea. And I argue this is what happens when we die. And we never get to the point of death. But ultimately, I think over a number of lives, we do move on. We eventually do move on. And where we move on, I have no idea at all.
Okay.
I
Yeah. I
can't
mean, I was
put a
going to
time.
ask, what about funerals? What about bodies in the ground, right? What about
Well, the
wars
body in
and
the ground,
deaths? And
remember, the body in the ground, you're in a different time zone. When you're dying, your time perception has changed. So you never get to the point where you die. So therefore, you never get to the point where your body is buried. You never get there. Other people in other people's time zones, there is a technical term in philosophy. Charles Sanders Peirce, who was an American philosopher, came up with something which he called the phaneron. And the phaneron is that we all carry around us our own version of the world, which is in our own time scales and everything else as well. And each of us are subtly different in the way our world works, both in terms of time, both in terms of environment. Now, modern quantum mechanics very much is of the same token. I mean, at the moment, I'm telling the and what it is, but what I won't have time to do is, and people read my work will know this, I do the science of this. The things I'm saying now are not just things I've thought up, they're things that are backed by known science. Now, for instance, in quantum mechanics, there's something called the collapse of the wave function, which is effectively the act of observation by a mind, or the act of measurement, collapses and changes a subatomic particle from being statistically anywhere in the universe to being in a particular location in a particular place. It's the implication of something called the twin slit experiment, or the double slit experiment, which is
oh,
the
yeah,
most mysterious discovery ever in science.
sure.
Now, I apply this and I say, well, if this is the case, we are all collapsing the wave function of our intentions, which means that, and I argue that we are all existing in this super complex game of life. And all of our lives interface and overlap in particular ways, like our lives are overlapping now. And I call this the egregorial. It's the created world that we exist in. It's something that the Hindus would call Maya.
Okay. Yeah.
And modern science is more and more coming to the conclusion that this is how the universe works. It works on holographic principles. It works on mathematical principles, because the universe we see around us that we think is so solid is 99, well, giving the example of, say, the hydrogen atom, is 99.99999999996 empty space. Every single hydrogen atom, and other atoms are slightly less or slightly more. But the thing still proves the fact. Every atom has a tiny thing called a nucleus, and it has electrons whizzing around, but all of it's empty space. And electrons are point particles, which means they have no extension in space. Then you have the nucleus itself, which is made up of protons and neutrons. But protons and neutrons are made up in turn of things called quarks or quarks.
Yeah.
And by the way, people argue I always pronounce it wrong, quark. It's not. That's how the guy who came up with the idea wanted them to be pronounced. So just to point that out. But anyway, so we'll use quarks for now. So they're just made up of quarks, and there are 6 different flavors of quark. But quarks themselves are point particles in the same way. So suddenly the physical reality you see around you, suddenly, and this is hard science, this is not new age wacko stuff. So in which case, the only reason that your hand doesn't go through a table or you don't fall through the chair that you're sitting on is what's called electrostatic repulsion. At the edge of each atom is an electron which is negatively charged in the final shell of the electron. And the
Hmm.
electrons in your backside are also at the edge of the shell, and they're negatively charged as well. So when you remember school, 2 negative sides of a magnet, you put them together, they repulse. And that's called electrostatic repulsion. And this is why we never touch anything. So when we feel we are touching something, what we're actually feeling is the electrostatic repulsion. So suddenly,
Mm.
everything we think is solid and real isn't. It's not. It's not there. There's nothing there. It's mostly empty space. Then we
Shit.
have the mystery of the universe. 94% of the universe is missing. Baryonic matter.
Hmm.
which is what we think as physical matter, is only 6% of what the universe really is. The rest of
Yeah.
it is dark energy and dark matter. So
Sure.
suddenly, even the physical reality, and then my final point here to point that out to people is that even light, the way you are seeing me now is because tiny points of light, tiny points of energy called photons are bouncing off your computer screen and interfacing with your retina in your eye, which is then creating an image in your visual cortex. Those photons that are causing these stimulations are again point particles. They have no extension in space, but more importantly, they can only travel at the speed of light. Each photon can only travel at the speed of light. And this is
Yeah.
important because traveling at the speed of light means that for those photons, there is no time. So the things that make us see the universe around us have no mass, and they exist in this world of timelessness. So this whole thing that we think is reality and our visual world and everything else is stranger than you can ever imagine. And perception scientists, they have a term for describing people that believe that what you're seeing is what is actually out there. They're called naive realists, because whatever is out there, it's not what we think it is. And this is pure science. This is
Sure.
not new age wacko nonsense. So suddenly when we die, suddenly death, because we don't even know what life is. We don't know what death is. I have a whole section on in my book about defining what death is, because we
Sure.
don't know.
Sure.
We've no idea.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, it's one of the greatest mysteries facing humanity forever, right? To what happens, quote, after we die, or what happens before we're born. I'm with you.
Mm.
This all very. You're connecting a lot of things, which I like. So, let's say, for instance, you know, what about all the people that have lived before? Is just basically all life existing and just repeating forever? Does that include plant life, animal life, alien life? Like what?
Okay. What we
Aquatic
have to do
life.
is what we have to do is take a step back here. I mean, my overall hypothesis is put out in 13 books. So there's an awful lot of information
Oh
in there, and
wow,
I can
look
go
at
off
you.
on different tangents if we want.
Yeah,
But central to my cheating the ferryman hypothesis is, I was mentioning about the two sides of the brain, and we have two kinds of personalities, which has
yeah,
been proven from split brain operations. Michael Gazzaniga, people like that have been doing. We know that there are two separate personalities in the brain. Now, the issue here, we have people also whose personality split up in multiple personality syndrome or dissociative personality syndrome. So we have this feeling that we are a single entity, that we are a single something looking out of our eyes. But modern science has no idea how our brain actually creates consciousness, particularly
sure,
self-referential consciousness. They've no idea. It's called a hard problem
sure,
of science. So we think that we are a single entity, but I argue that we're not. We're not even two entities. What I argue is that we are effectively, as Bill Hicks, the comedian, said, we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. So we believe that we are individuated pieces of consciousness because that helps us function within whatever this holographic illusion is. So
sure,
you and I think you're Patrick, I'm Anthony. They're labels we give ourselves. But of course, we change throughout life. We look differently. Me at 71 looks totally different from what I looked at 21. It's almost
sure.
a different person. I had shoulder
It
length
is.
hair and a beard
Yeah,
and an earring and God knows what else. I'm a different kind of personality.
yeah,
So we change over time.
sure.
We're different over time. Our bodies replace virtually every single atom in our body every 7 years. So we're not
Yeah,
even the same body going
yeah,
forward. But we have this feeling of systematic continuity because we have a memory. We have memories, which is
sure,
what gives us who we are. But we think we are individuated, but we're not. And I'd argue that if you go further up, we have our higher self, which is the daemon, which is the game player, the person that has the memory of all our lives. So
got
when
it.
you play a computer game, there is the on-screen sprite, which I call the eidolon, which lives one life and then it dies, like when you play a computer game, the creature on the screen, runs out, gets killed by a monster. The
Yeah.
daemon is the game player who remembers all your previous games and guides you through life. You know, people talk about spirit guides. They talk about a voice that talks to them. I call that the
Sure.
daemon. And in fact,
Sure.
I received a message yesterday from one of the world's top gynecologists, a Greek guy. And he was telling me, he read because one of my books is in, two of my books are in Greek. And he picked up one of my books in a Greek bookshop a few weeks ago. And he was explaining to me, he has this voice in his right ear that talks to him all the time. And this voice guides him. This voice tells him. This voice told him about checking out my book in the bookshop. And it guides him all the time. And
Interesting.
he's not alone in this. You know, he's
Hmm.
not alone. So many people have this guide. And I argue this is because his doors of perception are wider open to allow the communication channels between the daemon who's lived your life many times, which is the real you, and the eidolon, which is just lives one life. But I then argue,
Sure.
and I cannot prove this scientifically, but I know from philosophy and I know from esoteric beliefs, above that is something I call the uberdaemon. And the uberdaemon is the equivalent of the Jungian collective unconscious. It is literally the personality of all humanity, one single consciousness that is the consciousness of everybody. And we are like waves of an ocean. We're like a wave that comes up and exists for 70 years and then goes back down into the ocean. So the ocean is the collective unconscious, which is all the memories of every single human being that's ever lived. And that is the greater us. And those memories are when people have hypnotic regression, when they go back into past lives. They're drawing up that knowledge field from the uber daemon. And then I argue above that is something I call the godemon. And the godemon is effectively the consciousness of everything that is and ever has been and ever will be. Anything that's sentient is part of this. It's what the Kabbalists would call the Or Ein Sof. It's what is Brahman within the Vedanta tradition.
Well,
These
what
are
do you
ancient
describe
traditions.
as sentient? How would you define sentient exactly?
Sentience is being aware of the fact of what you are, being self-referential, being aware of your actions and why you do them. For instance, you know, one of
Okay.
the things is about, you know, are animals sentient? Well,
Yeah.
animals, the evidence seems to be that animals are conscious, but they're not aware of the fact that they are something, if that makes sense. For instance,
Yeah.
it's
Sure.
unusual. There are only two types of animals that will realize when they look in a mirror that that's them. They do
Sure.
test, they put a mark on the animal's nose, and most animals will try and attack it, but other animals like chimpanzees and things will realize and will go, oh. So
That's
that
me.
means the chimpanzee is aware of the fact that they are this three-dimensional being in space. So they have an identity. So they have referential consciousness, but they don't have self-referential consciousness, which is worrying about the things you do. You know, the way you think, oh, 10 years ago, I really shouldn't have done that.
Sure.
And you then plan where you're going to go in 5 years' time, these kind of things. This is self-referential consciousness. But then
Sure.
you bring down consciousness then to the idea of, well, are insects conscious? Well, there's an argument to say that insects like a beehive or an ant's nest is a single consciousness. It's as if they are almost my equivalent of the Uberdaemon as a
Hmm.
single, they all are individual ants. I mean, I saw
Sure.
something on Facebook, on social media recently, a really amazing thing where you saw a group of ants and there was this kind of object which was like shaped like an H, and they were trying to get through a barrier. And the way the ants worked together immediately to negotiate getting round through the barrier was extraordinary. And they had a group of people try to do the same thing. And it took the people far longer to do it than the ants. The reason being that the people are individuated consciousnesses, not working together in the same way that a group of ants are. So could it be then that plants could be sentient in a certain
Sure.
way? So there's
Sure.
levels of sentience that builds up. So then you have this godemon, which is effectively everything that keeps everything going. There was a great statement made by Sir Julian Jaynes many years ago, who was a British astronomer. He said, the more we understand about the universe, the more we realize it's not a great machine, it's a great thought.
Hmm.
And it's the idea that we're not a first base in understanding how the universe functions. As I said, the mystery of dark energy, dark matter. So it seems that the universe is different to what we think it is. We're starting to understand how black holes function. Now, when you think about it, the universe is such a bloody strange thing. You know, it's has it been there forever? Did it spontaneously come into existence with a big bang? Are there
Hmm.
more than one universe? Well, of course, Hugh Everett
Hmm.
III in 1957, with his many worlds interpretation, argued there are trillions of universes, which again is supporting my hypothesis that there's a version of you that will experience every outcome of every decision in your life. And again, it's
Sure.
supported by the many worlds interpretation, or in its greater iterations now, the many minds interpretation. We also know that the universe that we exist in seems to be hardwired for the evolution of sentience and consciousness from the first moments of the Big Bang. It's called the cosmic anthropic principle. Now, if there's only ever been one universe, the universe got it right first time for the evolution of consciousness. Or there are trillions of universes, and we just happen to be in the one where consciousness evolved, or one of a handful. So these
Sure.
things are fascinating, deeply philosophical issues, but they all support one hypothesis: cheating the ferryman.
Yeah. Well, so okay, I have a couple questions. Two, like one, so I guess I would ask, like, what about you mentioned time dilation, earlier, and anytime I think of time dilation, I always think of the movie Interstellar, right,
Yeah,
and how just
brilliant. The
time
Tesseract
passes.
sequence.
Yeah, right. How time just passes differently, and if because of gravity, right? So gravity
Mm.
has clearly this effect on quote time, even on Earth. They say the further you are from whatever sea level or the ground, you experience time differently, right?
Yeah,
Depending
your
on
feet are older than your head.
yeah, exactly. So that's interesting to me and how gravity plays into that and what that means for time. And if time and space is connected, well, we can travel through space. So does that mean we can travel through time? And, they always say, if you and I were like today, we had this interview, right? If I just said, hey, we're going to do an interview, you would go, okay, great. I know where to go for the interview. Sent me a link, but what time? Right. We need a
Mm.
reference in that we both agree on that our life will reach that same point at the same time, right? That's why we showed up at the same time, right? So time is like a reference we use, but also a thing. And it's very fascinating. I agree. But then I would say, like, okay, so what, I guess I think about all, aside from Earth, I know that's difficult to, let's move outside of Earth. So, what do you think about like extraterrestrial life or whatever we're going to call it, interdimension, whatever it is out there? Is it all connected to us too? Is it a separate thing? Do they have a different way of living? Maybe they do die. Death does exist for them, or is this a universal thing that just is like the way
I
life
cannot
is?
answer that. I cannot answer that question in that I genuinely don't know, but I suspect.
Just
And
suspect, yes.
in my
Yeah,
book, The
whatever you
Hidden
think.
Universe, I argue that the entities that we encounter, either as poltergeists or as ghosts or as aliens or greys or whatever, the fae, the goblins, all these kind of things,
Yeah.
they all have an intimate symbiotic relationship with us, as if our anticipations of them create them. And I call them egregorials. And in a number of my talks I've done at Contact in the Desert, this is the area that people really find fascinating. And in fact, I've had long conversations with Whitley Strieber about it. And Whitley is fascinated by my ideas and models, as a lot of
Sure.
people are once they actually discover them. And most people, when they come across my work, there's normally a moment when a little light goes on and they go, "What? Is that what you're saying? Bloody hell." And they sit back and they go, "I cannot believe what you're coming up with here." But
Sure.
egregorials, I argue that we, not like I said, we collapse the wave function and we can actually, by our observations, by our anticipations, I argue that we can do the same thing with beings, with sentient entities. And in one of my books, I give many examples from history where people have created thought forms, tulpas, these kind of creatures whereby they anticipate them. and they come into existence as if they're kind of waiting for us, and they use us to bring them into existence. I mean, there's the classic example of the Philip
That's
experiment that
interesting.
took place in 1971 in Toronto, where a group of people created an entity, created a spirit, created a ghost that didn't exist. They literally
Oh wow.
it's quite a fascinating story. What happened was there were a group of people in the psychology department at the University of Toronto, and like everybody else, they played around with Ouija boards. And they were
Sure.
quite fascinated as to when they moved the glass, they realized that it was subliminal movement that they were doing, but what was happening and how was it happening? So they sent one of the group away and they said, tell you what, you go away and let's create a completely mythical person. You go away and you'll write a background story of this character and see what happens. So the lady went away and she wrote this storyline of a guy called Philip Aylesford, who lived in the 1670s in the Midlands here in the UK. And he lived in a castle, and he was in a loveless marriage. And because although he was a noble, he was an outsider because he was a Roman Catholic. So it was after the period of the English Civil War. He meets a gypsy girl, and he falls in love with her. His wife then finds out, and he's so desperate about this, he commits suicide by jumping off the mount, jumping off the battlements. Complete fiction. So
Sure.
then the group get together, and he starts manifesting. He starts communicating with them, which was interesting in itself. But then
Mm.
he started to be able to turn the table. He was turning the tables and he was making poltergeist activity take place. And
Hmm.
indeed, if you actually go onto YouTube and you look up the Philip experiment, there is a video there of the group together in a TV studio where they manifest Philip and the table starts to rock. Now, these were
Wow.
research scientists. These weren't people that were believed in spiritualism. They realized that they, through mind control, were bringing about this entity. Now, we know from history, there are these concepts, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, called tulpas. These are thought forms that come into existence. And in my book, I give a number of examples of people who have created thought forms. Now, of course, in magical tradition, people like John Dee and his associates and Aleister Crowley. This is what they were doing. They were
Yeah.
creating entities to bring them through in order to use them as their slaves, to give them power. So you talk to any esotericist, you talk to any occultist, there'll be two things that they'll agree with me about my hypothesis. The first one is the daemon, the higher self, and the second one is the existence of what I call egregorials. So these are things that people involved in this, they know about this. They've been doing it for centuries. I've come to it through science, but they know. I get contacted by occultists all the time, and they'll say, "Do you know you're doing the science of the stuff we've been doing through my traditions for centuries?" You know, there's a group called the Servants of the Light, who are one of the world's biggest esoteric groups. They asked me to talk to them about my concept of the daemon, and the leader of this group is a lady called Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki. And she told me in front of all the acolytes, it was like a scene from the Tom Cruise movie Eyes Wide Shut. It was really weird. They invited me to this
Yeah.
thing, and it was exactly the same feeling. And she said, Anthony has done the science of our beliefs. And we know these are real because these are techniques we train people to do. So the idea is that we can co-create these. And I think this is what aliens are. The aliens are already out there in higher dimensions of space-time, possibly maybe the fifth or sixth dimension, as you mentioned in earlier on in terms of Christopher Nolan's movie Interstellar. There's the sequence in the Tesseract sequence where you see the main character looking through the life of his daughter and all the alternate realities she's existing within, because he's looking into the four dimensions of space time from a position of a higher dimension of space time, where time he's outside of time, looking at all
Yeah.
time. And these entities exist in somewhere there, but they need our cooperation to bring them in. Now, again, series of experiments were done in the 1990s here in the UK in a place called oh God, my brain's gone blank now. It's a place in Norfolk, small village. And in that experiment, they again brought forward entities. They created entities, and these entities were communicating with them from somewhere else. The Skull experiment,
Mm.
Skull, Schole, no, OLE, which is a village. And some of the things they got there were just extraordinary. But this is similar to experiments that were done in the 1990s called Imperia and Rector, which were a group of experiments done by members of the Society for Psychical Research, where again, the entities were trying to communicate with them and saying, we are from somewhere else and we're trying to communicate with you. So it seems that under certain circumstances, we can open up these doors. And I think this is what aliens are. Now, again, a group of my associates are doing fascinating research at the moment, which should be worldwide known. They're doing research with dimethyltryptamine and dimethyltryptamine entities. They are manifesting entities that are showing independence. Again, one of the guys that's involved in this will be one of my co-speakers. It's the guy that wrote the foreword to my latest book. He's a guy called Dr. Pascal Michael. He spoke last year. I managed to get him a gig at the Contact in the Desert last year, and they've invited him back this year. He's one of the world's top young neuroscientists. They are doing incredible work with these entities. They're taking DMT. They're going into what's called the DMT cage, the DMT space, and entities come over to them and speak to them. One of my associates, Carl, who's a university lecturer, he took the DMT, and this entity comes over to him and speaks to him, and it says, you shouldn't be doing it this way. This is not how you should be communicating with us. And it disappeared back again. 2 weeks later, he's back, takes the DMT again. The same creature comes over and says, I told you last time, this is not how you would be doing it. And Carl said to me, in my own podcast, I interviewed Carl on this. So if anybody's interested, all the stuff I'm talking about here, a lot of the people I'm talking about, I've interviewed on my own podcast, from Arthur Funkhauser. They're all there. Diane Hennessy Powell, who's going to be the major speakers this year. I interviewed her 5 or 6 years ago on my podcast for her work she's doing with telepathic children. Really, really intriguing stuff. Pascal has been on my show as well. So it seems that the entities know we're here and are using us. Now, these entities look very like greys. They're nearly mantoid. They're like mantises or insectoid. Now, again, it seems that we think that the kind of the UFOs are kind of physical things that are flying out there, and they are, but we create them. I mean, last year, there was an amazing event took place at Contact in the Desert, and a group of people, after it happened, sought me out, and they said, you can't believe what's just happened. And a group of them were outside. They were doing stargazing outside. And as they were doing it, a UFO came over and flew over them at low level, about 50 or 60 feet, and flew into the distance. And then 10 minutes later, it came back again. And they all saw it. But I'd argue that nobody outside of that group saw it. And I'll give you an example of why of this. I did an event last summer in Southend in the UK. And a lady came over to me after the talk, and she showed me her phone, and she had a piece of film on the phone. And in the film, she's got her phone, and she's filming through a window, looking out over the sea outside Southend, over the Thames estuary. And as you watch the film, there is a group of UFOs flying in a line. And the one in front moves to the back, and they continue moving and continue. The UFOs are doing this. And she turns around and she said, is that a reflection in the mirror, in the window? So she opens the window and continues filming, and the objects are there. And you realize from listening to it, there's somebody standing next to her who's her friend. And she goes to her friend while she's filming. She says, can you see them? And she said, no, I can't. Her friend says she couldn't see anything. And she said, no, they're there. I'm filming them. And then she stopped the film and she filmed it back, and the objects were there. And as she said to me, only I saw those objects, but they showed on the video film, but my friend didn't see them, which means to me, it's like there was a famous Dutch guy, Peter Herkos, many years ago, was able to affect film by his anticipation. He would think in front of a camera, and marks would occur on the film. And I believe this is an effect. She was seeing these things, or wanting to see them, to such an extent she was able to make them appear on the camera. And this is exactly the same thing as what
Interesting.
happened with the group at Contact in the Desert. And I argue these are, again, vindication and proof of my egregorial hypothesis, that we bring these things into existence by our act of anticipation. And this is why UFOs over the years have changed. This is why in the 1890s we had the airships, then we had the Space Brothers and the Nordics, and then we had the Greys. And the
Yeah.
UFOs themselves, they change following our technology.
Sure.
It's as if we are creating them. And this, of course, is what Jacques Vallée argues. It's what various other writers have argued. The
Sure.
phenomenon is much more interesting than just aliens. Much more interesting.
Than just beings from another planet. No, I get
Yeah.
you. Did the friend that didn't see the UFO, and then was she able to see it on the video?
Yeah. Yeah. I could see it
So
on the
she saw.
video. She
You could
showed
say
me the video,
anybody
so
could
I
see
could see
it,
it on the video.
but live in person, just the woman who filmed it, at least there was between her and her friend. I don't know if anyone else
Correct.
saw it, but she couldn't see it. No, that's interesting for sure.
Well, one of
Was
the
it a
final
digital
things
camera or
is
a
a digital
film? It's digital.
camera.
So
Yeah, it's film.
what do you think? Like what
Very
like
good.
science? How is that work? How is she
It can't.
affecting the
It
chip
can't. It
and
cannot. It cannot be.
digital?
That's why I was mentioning the Peter Hurkos thing, because it seems that because if everything is a projection of us or a projection of, but it's information, we can have far more effect on what's going on out there than we believe we can. Because everything
Sure.
is, as I said, that film on that camera is effectively exactly the same. It's 99.9999999 empty space. So the camera only exists in the sense that our perception of it puts it together in a kind of the atoms come together to create a camera. I did an event a few years ago, almost 6 years ago, almost now, in Drakelow Caves, which is a group of tunnels in the UK. And I won't go into the background, but it was a fascinating exercise we did there. And when I was taken round these heavily haunted places before we did the event by one of the researchers that's working there, he showed me a photograph they'd taken in there of an entity that had manifested. And it's on a photograph, which he showed me. And it's a star being. He made me stand where the photograph had been taken. And it's a doorway and it's dark. This place is heavily haunted. It's really weird. And there's this
Yeah.
creature standing there. And it's the shape of a human being, shape of a body, but it's made of stars. And I said to him, can I take that and use it? And he said, no, because it's incredibly sensitive. The people who took it they don't know quite what to do with it. So no, you can't. But
Hmm.
it was a star being.
Wow.
Now, and he said we could only see it in slight darkness. But when the camera picked it up in startling form, which means that photons were leaving that object and interfacing with the coupling device in the camera.
Yeah.
So literally there was something out there
Sure.
that was emanating
It showed up.
electromagnetic energy.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, that's
extraordinary.
man. I agree. This is all fascinating. Look, we don't have much more time, so this will be the last question I ask. God, I hope I get to see you at Contact in the Desert and talk to you more, man, because this has
Oh
been
yeah, we will.
so,
We will. I
bro.
spend time talking with
Oh my
everybody.
God, this has been so fascinating. I have a bazillion questions. I love when interviews end like that, where there's so much more I would want to ask you. Um, but let's end on this question. I think, well, maybe we don't all agree, but I would argue that we don't fully understand our mind and how it works. To put it simply, I'm sure there's a better way to say it, but so with that said, how do we know we can even trust, what we're seeing, what we're not? You're trying to explain life and how it works and all that. How can we trust these things? How do we know that that's actually the truth or reality?
We can't. I mean, effectively, when you realize that everything you are perceiving, like your visual world, I'll give an example of the visual world you're looking at the moment. What happens is these tiny particles, these photons I was talking about that can only travel at the speed of light and are point particles, a stream of those, and sometimes they're a wave and sometimes they're a particle. We won't go into that because that, again, really freaky
Yeah.
stuff. So these things, let's just imagine they're a stream of little particles. They enter your eyes through your pupil, and by the way, they're not the same particle. They're not the same photon. What happens is a photon hits an atom, and it gets taken into the atom, and the atom has too much energy and gives off another photon. So even the photons themselves are not the photons that are out there. They're not,
Mm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so these photons, they then go through your aqueous humor, which is the gunk that's inside your eyeball, and it gets to a place called the retina. Now, the retina is a light sensitive piece of matter,
Sure.
organic matter, basically made up of neurons. So it's kind of brain material that's inside your eye. And this thing is postage stamp size, and it's inverted and it's bent because it's at the back of the eye. So
Yeah.
the photons hit that. And as the photons hit, an image is formed, which is then turned into electrical signal, which then goes down the optic nerve. And the optic nerve then crosses from each eye immediately below the pineal gland, which we haven't even touched upon yet in terms of my work. And they cross at something called the optic chiasma. And then they make their way to the visual cortex, which is in the darkest part of the brain back here. The visual cortex takes that signal, and from the data and information in the signal, which remember is postage sized and inverted and bent, it then takes that information and creates the visual field you're seeing in front of you. The visual field that surrounds you, that's up there and down there, that's the right way up, is not bent or inverted, and surrounds you. It does that by creating the imagery inside the visual cortex. And then it presents that information to whatever you are in your head. And we have no idea what you are inside your head. It's called the hard
Mm.
problem of science. We have no
Sure.
idea how the brain, which is basically electrical impulses and atoms, can create Patrick and Anthony. But it does. And it draws us from nowhere. It's made of inanimate matter. But from that, it creates the visual world. It creates the smell of a rose or the taste of a strawberry. These are called
Mm.
qualia. These things don't exist out there. There's no such thing as red or green or blue. They don't exist. They are certain vibrations of the electromagnetic spectrum that our brain interprets as being the color red. But I've no idea whether my color red is the same as your color red because we've no way of knowing. None at all. The same with taste. The taste of a strawberry. The feeling of pain. Pain is a qualia. Why is pain unpleasant? I've never understood this. I know pain really hurts, but why? What is it about pain that makes it unpleasant? And these are the huge, big questions that I've been asking myself since I was 12 years of age. And they are the things that drive my interest. So suddenly, in answer to your question about how we can say what is truthfully out there, we don't know. And I'll give one fascinating piece of information here. At the back of each eye, where the optic nerve leaves the back of the eye, there's what's called the blind spot. It's an area where the retina doesn't have a signal. And we all have it. It's in our visual field. There are two, one in each eye. But we never see it. And we never see it for one incredible purpose, because the brain fills in the information that's missing. So there's part of your visual field that your brain has created from what it thinks is there. Now, if your brain
Sure.
can create a tiny bit of what's out there and what it thinks it's there, why couldn't it create the whole thing? And if it creates
Yeah.
the whole thing, is that how we explain dreams? Remember, you're in a dream. There's a light source in a dream. You feel things in a dream, but you're dreaming it. But we know neurologically, when you scan the brain, they did an experiment a few years ago where somebody was dreaming playing tennis. Exactly the same parts of the brain lit up when they were playing tennis in the dream to when they're playing it in reality. This is
Yeah.
so important. So the idea is what we think is going on isn't what is going on. You look back at yourself and you think, well, what exactly am I? For billions of years, I didn't exist. And for billions of years, I won't exist. As I said in one of my books, it means that all that's happened is for an infinitely tiny, small amount of time, something was self aware and then disappeared. That can't be what's happening to us all. What's the point of anything if that's the case. There has to be something more.
Yeah.
And
So,
one day, somebody will take my ideas and maybe make it click. At the moment, I've laid the groundwork, and I'm leaving it to other people now to take what I've done and to say, okay, maybe he was a nut job, maybe he was really weird, but his science did work, and my science does work. And in my books, I give you all the references to the academic papers I research. But, I have 40, 50 pages at the end of each my book just referring to the academic papers, because I say to people, don't believe me. This is the research. Go and look at the research yourself.
yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. Everything you're saying is absolutely fascinating. Are you kidding me? Um, yeah. Wow. I've got a lot to think about, and yeah, this is going to have me thinking the rest of the day. To be honest with you, fascinating, man. This was such a fascinating conversation, Tony. Yeah, my mind is. I'm not saying I accept it all. Just to be fair,
Mm,
I don't know. I'm just taking it all in. It's all new information. I'm taking it all in. I don't know what to trust anymore. I guess is kind of
mm.
the thing. But I also think, well, what do I need to, why do I need to make a definitive, you know, s- stand on a lot of this stuff? Right?
I think
It's
it's all down
ongoing.
to each of us. Each of us are here to
Yeah.
understand, and we
Yeah.
may have end up with different understandings.
Sure, for sure. And that's part of life. To me, that's the fascinating part of life, not knowing kind
Mm,
of what's around the corner and, what's over the bend. And, that's fascinating to me, to be honest with you. And again, knowing that we don't know everything and we don't even know what we don't know, that's fascinating. And someone like yourself who's going out there and doing as much work as you are into maybe at least trying to give us a glimpse into something of what could be is awesome, man. So yeah, this was such a
thank you,
great conversation. I really
thank you.
appreciate all the work you do and having this conversation with me. And again, I look forward to meeting you at Contact in the Desert. But before we go, real quick, just if you want to shout out, I don't know, your social media handle. Basically, how can
Yeah,
people connect with you? And I'll make sure to put links in the description as well.
yeah, okay, yeah. I'm extremely active on social media. Anyway, I have a Facebook. I have numerous Facebook accounts, but the main one is Anthony Peake. I also have Facebook accounts for all my books. So if you want to comment on the books, you can do that there. My website is anthonypeake.com. I also have my own YouTube channel. Again, if you just search Anthony Peake, you will come across it. You will find, in terms of my work, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of interviews I've done, hundreds. And there are lectures, presentations. I mean, a number of the talks I have done in over recent years in Contact in the Desert have been uploaded now as well. I mean, it was quite interesting. Again, with Contact in the Desert, they didn't know what they were getting with me till I turned up, and then it's everybody's sitting there going, "What bloody hell?"
Yeah.
Which is really nice, which is really good.
Right.
So you can join me there. You can, in terms of my books, they're everywhere. My books, I read my own books for Audible. So my books are on Audible, on Kindle. You can get them from your local bookshop. So just go to your bookshop. If they don't have the books, you can order them. I also say to people, you don't have to buy them. You can go to your local library and order them from your local library. So please do that. I really don't mind. I don't care about selling books. I care about getting the ideas out there.
Right.
My books are also available even in Braille. I have a couple of books in Braille as well.
Oh
They're
wow.
also translated into a number of my. You'll find at least one book in every major European language, and a number of minor ones. I've got two books in Croatian. There's two books in Greek. So they're all there. We're under negotiations at the moment to get them in Mandarin Chinese, which is something we're working on at the moment. So the books are there, just read them. We've got new editions of my books coming out all the time as well. So just look me up and seek out Patrick and I at a Contact in the Desert if you're there. Believe me, I am very approachable. I spend, when I'm not lecturing at Contact in the Desert, I'm talking to people. And I'm
Yeah.
doing it
No, I love
for
that.
the whole time I'm there. And we already have a group of people that we sit round and we discuss these ideas for hours on end. You know,
Wow.
this I need the feedback.
Sure.
I'm nobody special. I'm not a
Sure.
guru. I'm not anybody special. I'm not channeling this information. I'm not a version of Basher or whatever. I'm an ordinary guy that's trying to do the science. And that's
Love it.
important. And if you agree with me that we have to do the science first to understand the things rather than channeling it from the planet Tharg. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is my point of view on that. But
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I would say don't come at me at Contact the Desert till after I've had my coffee. That's just I need my coffee first, then approach me. No, of course, I'm very approachable. I'm Texan. Texans are very
absolutely.
approachable. Yeah, that's what we're all about
My
that.
favourite singer-songwriter is Texan, the late
Who
Nancy
is it?
Griffith. Nancy Griffith.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, Texas music history
Oh, it's
is
extraordinary.
another thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Some
Which
of
is
my,
what made living
some of
in
my
Austin so
favourite
well.
bands, come from Texas. It's just
Amazing.
fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
Because
amazing.
music is another thing I'm fascinated in. So
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you again, Tony. Yeah, really just appreciate coming on, man. Look to
Yep.
seeing you soon. Appreciate
okay,
it.
Patrick. Speak to you soon. Okay, bye.